Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fadi Manawi. I'm here from Visa Place. I'm a U.S. attorney. I'm here with Lauren Cohen from eCounsel Global Inc. Happy to have her join me today. We're going to be talking about U.S. visas and their relationship with real estate transactions and how we can make that all work together. I know, I've held these types of seminars from in the past, and it was very general. Not focusing on any sort of one industry or area. So today we're focusing a little bit more about the real estate transactions and how we can make that all bundled in and work for you from a U.S. Visa perspective. Welcome, Lauren. Thanks for joining
Thank
me.
you. Thank you, Fadi. It's great to be here. I'm so excited.
Well, we're excited to have you here. You bring a wealth of knowledge and information, and I'm sure that's going to pay in spades for some of our viewers.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
That is the plan. Okay. All right. So myself, I'm going to be talking about the visa itself and focusing more so on the E2. We will touch on other visas, but my focus today would be for E2s, which is it's a temporary investor visa. It is not available for everyone. It is available for Canadians, and it is available for a number of nationals. You can actually go to our website to see which are the current nationals that can qualify for an E2, and you'll see that the list is quite substantive. There are many Western European countries, many countries around the world. So it's worthwhile if you are interested in investing in the U.S. to see whether your country does qualify. But getting to the nuts and bolts of the E2, it is it's a non-immigrant visa category. It can range in duration from a number of months up to 5 years. So for Canadians, for example, it is good for 5 years. And it is an application type that is renewable indefinitely, right? So long as the underlying business continues to exist, then you could remain on the E2 and apply for renewals. And sometimes people do curtail that into something more permanent. So having the E2 itself does not mean that it transforms itself to a green card, but it doesn't preclude a person from getting a green card as well if a passageway does exist for that individual. It does allow for the individual to live and work in the U.S., particular for that business. It also allows for a dependent spouse to get work authorization in the U.S., and of course for dependent children to attend school and things like that. A good thing about the E2 is that unlike many other visa types where individuals are relying on others, it could be other companies, other people. With the E2, your own fate is really in your own hands, right? So if you do qualify for an E2 and you're dead set on pursuing that E2, then you can do it, right? It's of course it's a possibility. There are of course certain strategies that come into play to strengthen a matter, but this is one of those situations where if you said, you know what, I want to be in the U.S. for whichever reason, and I'm convinced I'm gonna be there. You can it's certainly possible to get done, and I think we've all heard wonderful stories from all different people from different walks of life that have made that for themselves. So when it comes to an E2, what does it really, what makes up an E2? How does a person qualify for it? It does require, the way I like to look at it is it's three main qualifiers. The first, of course, is that there is a substantial investment. Now, that investment can really vary from one business to the next, right? Today we are talking about real estate transactions, and Lauren will get into that a little bit more. But the amount that a person has to spend, it should be. it should be relevant to the nature of the business, right? So if we were talking today about real estate and someone is indicating that they have a number of properties that they're purchasing and they plan on renting it out or getting a property management company that's related to their business. I mean, there's different ways to do this, but when it comes to a substantial investment, the higher you can invest, and remember, it's not an investment necessarily to a third party. It's an investment for into your own business, right? So if let's just throw a hypothetical out there. Um, if you indicated, or in your business plan you show that, okay, I need $150,000 to do my business, and that's how much you're investing, then I would say that is substantial for that E2. We've done E2 successfully at any various different ranges. Again, the higher you invest, the better it would be. But we generally look at 50, $75,000 and up is usually sort of the on the lower end of that threshold. The investment itself, it does have to be at risk. So that means that you can't just simply have an idea and run with that idea and apply for an E2. You have to prove and evidence that you've taken steps around this. So whether that means you've gone out and you've actually made the upfront investment, maybe it's purchasing some property, maybe it's purchasing a business that's again, a property management business or something of the like, then we have to show that you have taken those steps towards it. um, another important factor, especially when it comes to because we are talking about real estate in this context, is that the business itself cannot be marginal, right? So what does that mean? Marginality of the business is really the ability of the business itself being able to hopefully hire Americans, hire permanent residents in the U.S., right? You don't want to necessarily just show that it's a snowbird that just bought a condo in Florida, and they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to qualify for an E2. That's not going to necessarily work, right? Because it's going to look like it's too marginal of a business, even if that individual or couple is renting out that property and making an income that way. Again, we'll get into, I think, more of this later when Lauren starts discussing from her perspective. The in terms of actually getting to a point of an E2 application, we do need to show that there's going to be, so that investment has been made. There is a business plan that's involved, and again, Lauren will talk a little bit about that. That's in our wheelhouse. That's her forte. You do have to register a business, and there's again different ways to do this. There's online ways. You can get a professional like Lauren that can help with that prospect of doing it that way. And the application itself, once it's all actually prepared, it gets submitted to the consulate. The applicant will ultimately have an interview at the consulate where there's going to be questions asked of them, and they're going to have to answer questions about the E2 itself. So that is what sort of what to expect from an application perspective and from a paperwork wise. I know I've really simplified it, but that is you can't just go into this again with just an idea and that's it. That's really what it comes down to. Now, when it comes to certain pitfalls that individuals get into, there are a number. Sometimes people have various partners that become part of the E2 enterprise itself. And are those partners, are they sharing the same nationality? Are they Americans, perhaps? What are so when it comes to an E2, and if a person qualifies for the E2, the individual has to apply, and if they have partners, at least 50% of the business has to be owned by that individual, or a multitude of, if there are multiple partners, the majority has to be owned by individuals of the same nationality. Also, I think Lauren will probably touch on this as well. Sometimes people don't have that, cash investment that they want to make, and so there's going to be, financing. There's some financing that's going to be acceptable. There's some that are not, right? So if the business itself is, or if the loan is secured by the underlying business, and that can be an issue, right? And those are some things that you may want to speak to a professional about, because I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and they say, hey, you know what, I'm going to buy this $1.5 million business, and then you find out that the investment is a very small sum out of the entire investment amount, and much of it has been financed, right? I touched on this earlier with respect to marginality, and that can sometimes come into play. Whether a business is marginal or not, because the that this becomes a very important factor when it comes to an E2. Now, so there are some people that are, passive investors. They say, well, you know what, I'm going to be making money. I don't have to do too much. I don't have to hire anyone for this. That would become it's a big red flag, as you can see Lauren shaking her head. She knows this as well as I do. That's not that's not good for our purposes of getting an E2. And then then there are different business makeups. It doesn't really matter whether it's an LLC, it's incorporated. Technically, if it's a sole proprietorship or if it's a partnership, there are a multitude of ways of getting an E-registered enterprise that can work for you from an E2 perspective. Okay, so I think I know I touched on earlier with respect to dependence, and I can see some questions are coming in, and we can get to those as well. But I do want to give Lauren some time to also speak, and we're gonna hear, she has a wealth of knowledge to share, and happy to hear from her.
I muted myself so I wouldn't try. I wouldn't, say stuff while you were talking. It's hard for me to keep my mouth shut sometimes because I've got a lot to say. So I'm
Right.
Lauren Cohen. I'm really excited to be here with Fadi. I'm originally from Toronto, which is where Fadi is physically located at this time, and I am now in South Florida. And my business actually complements Visa Place, and I'm of counsel to them in many areas, and super excited about working together, because the reality is that it's important to have somebody with boots on the ground that really understands the industries that you're investing in. And my particular focus is on real estate. Why? Because I'm also a licensed realtor. So I'm a lawyer, I'm an Ontario lawyer, I'm a US lawyer, and I'm also a licensed realtor. So I've created a nice little program called How to Immigrate to Real Estate. So the reality is that this is a very unusual model. And the reason is, as Fadi will tell you, he mentioned earlier that your money has to be at risk. Well, is your money really at risk when you're investing in real estate? Sometimes. And that's why this real estate model is a little bit more challenging to prove and to satisfy the requirements, because there is a tangible asset that has value. And after the 2008 crash, people were trying to use real estate as a path to immigration, and there were lots and lots of challenges. However, if you structure things the right way, which we're going to talk about, then there is definitely a path, a successful path, to not only E2 visas, but also types of visas, more permanent residency. As Fadi said, an E2 is a non-immigrant temporary visa. There are other options available. As many of you are Canadian, and you may want a more permanent residency, a green card, a path to citizenship. An E2 does not give you that directly, although there are kind of creative ways to work around it when you have an E2 and you want permanent residency. But there's something called an EB5 visa, which is a path to residency, a direct path to conditional green card, and eventually a permanent green card. So we can talk about how all of those work for each of you. And the key is that it's not one size fits all. Okay. And even it's different depending on where you're from. For example, Canadians are processed usually at the Toronto consulate. And I say usually because it's still closed, but that's another story. So let's say under normal non-COVID circumstances, Canadians are usually processed at the Toronto consulate, and there are certain requirements and restrictions and page limitations, for example, on business plans that may not apply if you were a Mexican resident or citizen applying through the Mexican consulate, or Israeli, or French, or British. And the British requirements are actually more onerous than most because on the business plan, they have substantial additional requirements. So it's really interesting to look at each of these countries. And again, remember, the key is it's never going to be one size fits all. And one of the things that I find in being that cross-border specialist is that a lot of American companies treat Canadians as if they're American, and they're not. And you need to have every step of this process handled. It's not like you can just say, oh, I want an E2, let me make an investment, here's my business, I'm done. No, we want to make sure that you are handled tax-wise, that you have your assets protected, that your estate in Canada is looked after, because at the end of the day, you don't want to just throw all of your years of building your business away, right? So these are very important elements that are considered and brought into consideration through the process of working with Visa Place and with me and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go through a few slides just to talk about this model and how it works and how it doesn't. And I'm really hoping.
I'm gonna set this up. Okay, your slides are ready to go. All right.
So Fadi, just tell me, since I can't see the screen once I move over to PowerPoint, just let me know if I'm doing something wrong. Okay.
No problem.
All right. Thank you. So obviously, I just want to make a disclaimer here. I'm not giving legal advice, even though I am a lawyer. And, even though we are presenting this, we're not really giving you legal advice. We can't until we hear your specific circumstances. So just be aware of that. That's really important. Same goes for business planning. I can't guarantee any outcomes when we do a business plan. That's dependent on you and running your business. Kind of like going to Weight Watchers and getting all of the formulas, but then not implementing them, saying, why didn't I lose any weight? So that's a fun way to do things. So this next slide is kind of talking about the 8 elements of a successful investment, a successful investing across borders portfolio. And these 8 elements apply no matter where you're investing, really, but particularly when you're investing into the US. But for everybody, no matter if they're in the US or Canada, investing in Mexico, Honduras, Spain, you need to make sure that you have all 8 of these elements covered when you are creating your investment structure. Location is always going to be your number one most important thing if you're looking at investing in real estate, and for that matter, in terms of business in general, because you want to make sure that you're setting up your business or investing in real estate in a location that makes sense for you, for your family, for the business. For example, Fadi mentioned maybe you want to invest in a property management company. Well, a lot of property management companies are franchises. When you're investing in a franchise, probably many of you know, it doesn't mean you can say, oh, I want a franchise in Boca Raton, Florida for, XYZ or XYZ. Because at the end of the day, if it's not available, you're not going to get that franchise. So that can impact your choice of location as well. When you're investing in real estate, where you want to invest is going to be critical, because some places are definitely more available or more expensive than others. That's going to grow and morph and change as the real estate market here changes. Forbearance has impacted. Forbearance is not like forgiveness of mortgages. Forbearance is just delaying the payments, and then they get one lump sum. So the forbearance process just keeps being delayed, but eventually that delay is going to stop, and then there's going to be a lot of properties available in a format like a subject to or a short sale down here, meaning that you're going to be able to get access to real estate at a fraction of what you would normally get access to it. What are your investment goals, short and long term? So some people may have a long-term goal for a visa, but it may not be immediate. But we still need to make sure that we're investing with that in mind. Because if you invest, and I have a client now who has 4 or 5 single family properties, they're all condos. So it's very challenging to bring single family properties into a real estate investment portfolio, because each of those, even though she has them rented, each of those has to qualify only as one door. So the property value goes up that much more. And sometimes it's looked at as too not at risk enough. So I like to see more of development of vacant land. We go into number 3 now, property types. Single family is not so great. Multifamily, I love. Mixed use, definitely I like. Commercial is amazing. Developing properties is Airbnb, maybe converting single family homes into multifamily if you're allowed to do that with the local restrictions and ordinances and so on. How does that all look? What do you want to do with your investment and what are your goals? Again, so everything here goes into play with each other. Structure, the US entity choice. This is really important, and it's, again, not one size fits all, because what works for a Canadian that's staying in Canada for a short time and has to pay tax and dealing with the Canada Revenue Agency is going to be different than somebody that's imminently moving here. And that will impact the choice of entities here as well in the US. Do you want a limited partnership? How does that look? And what level of protection? What's the most important elements of this for you? Do you want to invest alone, number 5, or with partners? This is going to impact your access to capital and financing, and vice versa. Your access to capital or financing might be dependent on whether you're investing alone or creating a joint venture or having a partner. If you have a partner, as Fadi will tell you, you have to at least own 50% of the business that's investing in whatever it is in order to qualify for an E2 visa. And that 50% has to be owned by you or a Canadian company that's owned directly by you. But at the end of the day, it has to be 50% owned by you. How to purchase properties. Do you want to buy them outright? This all comes back to creating a real estate investment strategy. Not just saying, oh, let's just go buy property, but developing a strategy around those property purchases. What does that look like? How do you want to buy them? How many do you want? What do you want to do with them? Is your goal a visa? Again, immigration considerations, of course, this is what we're talking about today. And then probably the single most important element of any real estate investing process, whether it be real estate investing for a visa or real estate investing for the purpose of, cash flow and real estate investing as we know it, is making sure you have the right team, banking, logistics, due diligence, tax, accounting professionals, cross-border, not just one way, legal, financial guidance, asset protection. You shouldn't do this without having all of these bases covered, okay? The next slide, and I'm going through these as quickly as I can, is kind of just one path to investing in the US for foreigners. And this is that you have a foreign holding company, like let's say Canadian, since most of our viewers are Canadian holding company owns US holding company, 100%, let's say. US holding company then sets up individual limited liability companies which own the properties. So that's one way to definitely do it. You could have a US limited partnership if you want further protection for your assets. It really just depends on what your goals are. It might take a little longer for a limited partnership, but it might also be a little bit better for you in the long run, okay? The real estate investment types. So the only one that could not qualify for an E2 is the last one, REITs, real estate investment trusts, because obviously that's passive, but all these other opportunities or options could potentially allow you to have a path to an E2 visa. So we just have to figure out what strategy makes sense for you. I don't think a lot of you that are new to real estate investing are going to want to do industrial or maybe even retail or commercial, although I am a commercial real estate expert, because it's a little more complicated. However, please understand, in the US, and I'm not sure about in Canada, the definition of a commercial property is a property with 5 or more units. So even multifamily can be commercial if there's 5 or more units, which also then allows you to access a different type of financing, because commercial financing is not only available to those that have credit scores here in the US, but also available based on the production at the property, the cash flow at the property, the tax returns from properties that you're investing in. So those numbers are going to impact your ability to get financing in a different way than would if you're only dealing with residential, okay? So duplexes are never going to be considered commercial, but a quadruplex, sorry, not a quadruplex, like a decaplex as it's called, or a 5-plex or a 6-plex or a 7-plex, those could be considered commercial. Okay, quad is a 4, so that won't work. Sorry about that. So here's the two slides that are probably the most important for people that are looking at investing in real estate to qualify for a business visa. What is not going to work, as Fadi said, you have to be actively involved in running the business. It can't be a passive or marginal investment. If you own a rental property and hold title to it, like he said about buying a snowbird property in Florida, that's never going to work. If you have an asset holding company that owns a bunch of properties, that's not going to work. If you have a buy and flip model, flipping business, that's not going to work. They're too passive and you're not directing or managing or developing the investment, so they won't work. However, something like a property management franchise or another business like a service business or a landscaping business, or potentially like let's say a home decor business, something that complements the real estate investing, might work. There are janitorial services, cleaning services. So you may be able to combine them and have a more of a substantial investment and more of a substantial business that then will meet or overcome the marginality requirements or the marginality test. And marginality is that you can't just have a business that's going to just feed your family. You need to employ people. And if you say, well, that's not what I want to do, well, then you're not going to get an E2, because you have to have a business plan that focuses on employing people over the 5 years that are covered by the business plan. And then you have to actually do it if you want to renew that visa. So one of the things that's really important to understand when you're developing your business and your business plan is that you just getting the visa doesn't mean you're done. Once you get that visa, that's when the work really starts. And that's when we start working with you to implement all of the things that happen through the visa process, to implement your plan, to make sure that your business plan is executable. Now, things like COVID happen, hopefully not again, but we didn't anticipate this. And there's a lot of E2 visa holders here now, some of my clients that have had to pivot. So how does that look? Do you need to report? Potentially. But you also need to make sure that you have a good story for what you're doing and why you've made these changes. So when it comes time to renew, you're ready and able to provide the story. Because at the end of the day, the story, it's what's going to make or break you. And if you have the right story and the right professionals in place, you're going to be okay. I'm going to go to the next slide, and then I'm going to go and see if there's some questions, because I'm sure there are. So this is kind of talking about the model that does work versus the model that doesn't work. So, and to work, you could use the burr model, where you, and I apologize, there's a mistake here, a typo. It should be buying, renting, renovating, repeating. Buy, rent, renovate, repeat. Buy, renovate, rent, repeat, whichever order you want. The key is that at the end of the day, you aren't just flipping those properties. You're holding them, you're renting them, you're managing them, you're running a business. Why do you need to be in the US if you're not running a business? So if you don't need to be here and you can do virtual investing, that is never going to work for an E2 visa. Okay? Managing multiple rental properties on an ongoing basis. So why do we say this? Well, in Florida, we have what's, snowbirds, and we have season. So if you're only managing these properties for 6 months of the year during season, right now, who knows what season is anymore, but that could be a conflict, because what are you doing in those other 6 months? So you need to have an ongoing business. Maybe you'd have to have an Airbnb during the off season, okay? Managing commercial properties. This is also a really big opportunity, especially now because so many people have abandoned commercial properties. So talk to me. I have amazing opportunities on commercial properties all over the country, and would love to get you into some of them. They are really incredible opportunities because unfortunately people have had to leave their businesses and have abandoned these commercial properties. Some of them were even owned. Airbnb, that will always work. I wouldn't say one would work, but you have ongoing, like multiple bookings, and you have ongoing logistics. You have a lot of things and items to manage. So that could definitely work. Mobile homes are a good model, and they have a very high cap rate. So a lot of Canadians actually love investing in mobile homes and mobile home parks, and they're very inexpensive. Managing multifamily properties of 5 or more units, again, back to the commercial versus residential. These are much more likely to qualify, particularly if the business involves ongoing year-round activity. Okay, and that's again what we were talking about versus seasonal. So I'm going to go back to the slides. I'm sorry, going to go back to the presentation so that I can potentially answer some questions and view myself and see what's going on here.
All right, thank you, Lauren. If I may, just because we didn't really get into it into too much detail, there is the EB5 program that I mentioned initially, and Lauren touched on as well. That is a green card based application. It's for the investor as well as the family members, and it does require a minimum of 900,000 if the business is located in a targeted employment area, so it's a high unemployment region, or if it's in a rural area. Otherwise, the minimum investment would be $1.8 million. And along with that initial investment, the business has to be a type of business that can support 10 full-time employees in the future. So what happens is, even if somebody does qualify for an EB5, initially they get the EB5 as they get a conditional green card, and then within just before the 2-year mark, that the individual would have to apply to remove the conditions of that green card, and at that point they do have to demonstrate not just they have to demonstrate that the 10 employees have been hired and are needed for the enterprise. So I just wanted to touch on that. I think most individuals here are probably more interested in the E2, which obviously doesn't require 900,000 nor 1.8 million. So thankfully for
Although
that,
some people invest that much, even
yeah,
because they're buying real estate. And actually,
of
Fadi,
course.
if I may, so in the real estate model, a lot of people ask, so how much do you need to invest? Because it's
Hmm.
not the 150 or 200. It's really more like the sum of around 750 to a million. But
Hmm.
it doesn't all have to be invested in that risk at the time of application, and you're
Right.
investing in real estate. So the 150 or 200 might be your down payment or your out of pocket investment,
Hmm.
but in a larger investment overall. So it's not going to be, a couple of properties at 150, and that you can actually do in some places in the US, unlike
Right.
in Toronto where you can't even buy a driveway for that much. So, but that does, in the real estate model, that doesn't get you an EB5 even at that level, because
Right.
EB5 is about investing in a business that needs to hire 10 employees, and you're generally not going to need 10 employees to manage a real estate business.
That's right. Yeah. And just, interesting enough, I know you just mentioned, Lauren, that, you generally need a higher sort of investment from, for when it deals with real estate. If we are looking at other models associated with the real estate model itself, whether that is property management,
Mhm.
we've done many E2s for people in the construction industry. It can get creative when it
Yeah.
comes to that, and really depending on what the nature of the business is and what really is required. There's been lesser investments that have been approved, right? Yeah, maybe it's time we touch on some questions.
Sure.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. See a question here. What educational level is required for an E2 visa? There's no minimum educational requirements, so you don't need. We've had people that have had university degrees, people that don't even have high school, and they've been approved for an E2. So that's definitely doesn't come into play. The only sometimes it's a consideration that's made is depending on the nature of the business that the person's in. If has that person or the investor have they been associated? Have they been related to a similar business elsewhere? And when it comes to some of the more real estate sort of investment type of E2s, and I think there's a little bit more flexibility when it comes to that. You don't have to prove like you're a real estate developer in your country to make it on an E2 in the same maybe nature of the business. Is that correct, Lauren? Have you seen the same?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah, and I see a question about the minimum, as Fadi said, the minimum out of pocket. It's not about out of pocket, so just a minimum. So in E2, there's no there's no specific number stated anywhere. The terminology is a substantial investment in a non-marginal business. Okay, in EB5, it's a little easier. The
Mhm.
threshold is higher, but it's a little easier. The baseline is 1.8 million. However, it's 900,000 as long as we can qualify it in a certain thing called a targeted employment area, which we generally can do around the US. Okay. I see a question about the 10 employees for E2. No, there's not a 10 employee requirement for E2. The requirement is that you must prove the business is not marginal.
Mhm.
So for the purposes of the business plan and the E2 application, I like to see between 2 and 5 employees over the 5 years. But that's not a hard and fast thing. It's going to depend on the business. Now, in a real estate investment business, you could have like a landscaper and a logistics person and a superintendent, but you may not necessarily need a lot of full-time people, especially at the beginning.
Right.
So it's all about creating a strong business plan.
Okay. All right. Do we need to pass the English test? And if yes, okay, yeah. So yeah, an English test is not required. It's not a
No.
requirement for an E2. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. Although there would be an interview at the visa interview stage, and you normally would conduct that within the English language. So you have to be able to be proficient enough to speak about your business at that point. How can I make a consultation to talk to you one-on-one? Yeah, so I think our team has been putting it out there. You can actually reach out, make an appointment. Lauren, do you have any specific way that you?
Yeah, absolutely. I will share that with your team so that we can reach out to them, or I'll put it in the chat. I do have a paid consult as well that I can throw in there.
Yeah,
Um, I
yeah,
see
maybe. Mhm.
Fazal has asked about how many days out of the year do you have to stay in the US? It's very interesting actually, because this morning I was talking with a friend of mine who is from Canada, who is a lawyer,
Right,
who lives in New York and who's on an E2. And guess what? He's been in Spain for a year. So I
right,
said to him, I didn't know his current status. I said, "Oh, are you on a green card?" Because if he was on a green card, he'd be in jeopardy of losing it. But
right.
because he's on an E2, he actually has flexibility. I have a lot of clients, Fadi, I'm sure you guys do too, especially being based in Canada, that don't really ever plan to live in the US. And the
Mhm,
beauty of the E2 or E1, which is a treaty trader visa, is that you don't have to. You have flexibility and freedom. What it
right,
really does, the thing that I kind of sell the most with an E2 or E1 is it gives you options. So, for example, and this is not applicable to Canadians, although some might say it is right now, for those people in countries like Mexico or places where you're facing political unrest. We're not going down the political path today, but it people get these visas so that they do have that flexibility, and eventually if they need to or want to leave for whatever reasons, they have that ability to do so. So you don't have to move. It's really a way to buy you a lot of freedom and options. I have a trade show person. Obviously, they're not running trade shows right now, but they got an E1 because they do so many US trade shows, and they don't live
right.
here. They live in Toronto.
Mhm. Yeah, and likewise we deal with we have a lot of clients that are that could be Canadian based, and they don't they only go to the U.S. when they need to. So getting the E2 itself does not mean you have to pack your bags and get up and move to the U.S. It definitely provides that flexibility where if you wanted to operate it completely remotely from your home country, that's totally possible. Yeah, here's a good question for you, Lauren. What's the minimum investment for rental properties which utilizes Airbnb?
Again, it's the same method, I think, or the same approach that we've been talking about. It's not one size fits all. So it's going to depend on where you're investing. If you'd like, I would suggest setting up a consult with me and going through these models. I'll post it in the comments here for a paid consult. Okay, and I would strongly recommend that you set that up, because at the end of the day, um, we need to figure out a strategy that makes sense for you. And I apologize. The link came through in a funny way. I'm going to put another link in here that's a little more fun. So, because if you're investing in Ohio, for example, it's going to be different than if you're investing in Florida, because in Ohio, the prices are really low. So you may have more volume. It's, again, really going to depend.
Hmm. Okay. What about owning a business such as a laundromat? So not real estate related, but nevertheless, I mean, we can talk about that.
Yeah,
Having a business like a laundromat, I find I've seen this come up over and over again. I find that the biggest challenge is, some laundromats do have sort of staff working there, or,
right.
or a staff member, and others, they have the the vending machines and the coin, the bill changer and so forth. So if you're going to be involved in a laundromat, I would look at it from the marginality perspective, just to see whether is there really the prospects of hiring people for that business. That's what it really comes down to. Or maybe
Yeah.
a person's going to have multiple laundromats, and end up hiring a maintenance person to go across and the different locations. So there are ways you can be creative with that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I've seen a lot of laundromats and gas stations. I think somebody asked about gas stations, a very, very common E2 and for that matter, EB5 investment. One thing to be sure of, okay, you can use an E2 as an E2 investment as part of your eventual EB5 investment. So if you invest, let's say 200,000 and you want to eventually do an EB5, you have to invest that additional money from you personally. It can't go from the business. So even if you take it out from the business and pay taxes, because at the end of the day, that means money to the government, and then you can use that money and apply it. But the key is that if you want to think about eventually doing that, you want to make sure that you choose a location for your E2 investment that would qualify you for the lower investment threshold for the EB5. Okay? That's a really, really important thing. I have a client right now who set up a business in New York City on Lexington Avenue. Lexington Avenue in New York City is going to be very challenging to prove to qualify for the lower investment threshold. We have figured out a way that we may be able to work around it, but and otherwise she has to invest the whole 900 instead of including her 150 that she already invested in the business. Okay, does that make sense, Fadi? Do you want
I
to
think so.
clarify?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it makes sense. Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. So can the EB5 be a status adjusted? But okay, so you've kind of touched on that. I think.
Okay.
What is okay? You've already done that one. I already own 5 rental properties in the United States. Can I package them to E2? Can I?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. We just did that for a Canadian client now, and I'm going to give
Hmm.
you some interesting feedback. And this is why I like working with Body and Visa Place. So this gentleman who has more than 40 investment properties in the US, his lawyer told him you can't use those for the visa. 40.
Right.
I think that's substantial.
For sure.
Half of them he's a joint venture partner, but the other
Right.
half are his own. And he's
Hmm.
doing a lot of business, like a lot.
Hmm. Hmm.
So anyway, I've known him for a while. He's referred a lot of business to me. And he said to me, Lauren, I said, this guy's not like that's wrong.
Right.
So he had already paid him and he didn't want to pay to restart the whole thing, but we redid the business plan. Let me tell you, we went through 6 iterations of this business plan because he had been so misinformed by the original lawyer who said no real estate. And now this business plan is like stellar. And he had almost all of these properties before he actually started on the E2 process. Okay.
Hmm.
So, yes, it is possible, but it's very, very important to create a strategy at the earliest possible stage so that you don't have to fix everything and go through 6 iterations and maybe not be able to include all of your properties. Let's create a strategy. Fazal, yes, it can be across multiple states. Does it have to? No. Do you have to be in the US for a certain amount of time before you apply for a green card? No. But once you have your green card, then the clock ticks. And yes, you do have a requirement to be in the US so that you can qualify for citizenship if that's your eventual
Yeah.
goal.
And if I can
Is
just
what I,
add to that, if I can
what
just
I
add
mean?
to that, if I can just add to that,
Yeah, of
there
course.
are, let's just assume that your client actually, went forward and did apply for it, maybe without your assistance and wasn't successful, and then, he actually used your services, and you had all went through all these iterations. I see this quite commonly, unfortunately,
Yes.
on my end as well. And some many people ask me like, "Hey, can I apply? I applied before, I was denied. Can I apply again?" Absolutely, you can. However, doing it the first go around properly, that pays off in spades, right?
Oh my God.
Because you're
It
going
saves you so much money and
right.
time and aggravation
Exactly. Yeah,
and like,
it's an uphill
hey,
battle when you're trying to, like if somebody did apply for an E2, was denied, and now they've done it properly, and the officer is going to know that, wait a sec, you came back, 6 months ago, and you applied, and you were denied. So you prove to me why I should grant this to you, right? Like it's an uphill battle right at the outset.
yeah, and actually, I have a woman. I just interviewed her on my podcast. She's from Montreal. She lives in Southern California, and she didn't know me um, when she applied, and she applied for an E2 through real estate investing, and she was
Hmm.
denied twice. And the third time, she said she almost like begged the woman. It happened to be the same person all three times, which is
Right.
completely random. Okay, but the reality is she said it was the worst time of her life. She was ready to give up, and she kept saying on the podcast, you guys can watch it, her name is Nadine Lajoie, and my podcast is called Investing Across Borders. Actually, Fadi, I've got to get you on the podcast, and
Sure.
or Mr. Niren, our friend down here in South Florida. But at the end of the day, she was like, why didn't I know you? Well, the reality is that there's not a lot of people that apply, that work kind of around the whole process like I do. And that's why I love working with Visa Place, because really and truly, it's about thinking outside of the box and creating a model that will show immigration, wherever the immigration officer is, that what you're doing is legit and viable, and is going to employ people, and is going to make an impact on the economy. And if you can show all of those things, they are not going to deny your visa. But if you're going to write a crappy little business plan in your little office in your house because you have your, God forbid, have COVID. I was saying because you're at home because of COVID. That's not going to work. They're going to know. They're going to see that you're not really being serious about it. And to me, if you're being serious, hire professionals to do these things with and for you. Don't try to kind of circle around. At the end of the day, we have lots of clients, Fadi, I know it happens to you, that are like, oh, I'm going to do this myself. Oh, I'm going to do this myself. And a year and a half later, they come back, like you just said, okay, it didn't work out so well. Now I want to do it right. And now you've spent all this time and money. Why do that?
Right. Good points, Lauren. Got some more questions here, and we're getting ready to wrap up. So if you have any further questions, please post them now. But okay, related to a question. Okay, would the E2 allow one to travel freely between Canada and the US? So and I would say yes, it does. But of
Normally.
course, there's an asterisk here. If this question is referring to, um, there are certain travel restrictions back to Canada, even for Canadians returning to Canada. There's the
Yeah, they
quarantine
use,
hotels and so forth. So you just got to be mindful of that. But
yeah.
looking at this generally, E1, E2 visas, yes,
Mhm.
it does allow for free travel, but just be prepared for if you are traveling and it's during the time of there's quarantines and so forth. Just be mindful of that.
And I will tell you, as a Canadian, I have not been home
Hmm.
since this started. And the main reason, like, I am entitled to go home. My son has Canadian citizenship as well, so I have an entitlement to go home because I am Canadian, and
Right.
I'm on. But I don't want to deal with all of that. And right now, it's the 3 days, and then the 14 days, and the this and the that. And so I'm actually excited because as much as the U.S. has been kind of not exactly stellar in terms of how it's handled all of this, I have an appointment to get my vaccine on Sunday.
Oh,
So God willing,
congratulations. Okay.
let's hope it
All
happens.
right.
I have an appointment so far.
All right. I think there was a follow-up to that. So we're not talking about, okay, about the month limitations outside of Ontario. Yeah, there's no yeah, so the when someone gets an E2, so for a Canadian to get an E2, the visa itself is valid for 5 years, right? But the I-94, which is the travel record, is valid usually, at 2 years at a time. So long as you're in the U.S., your I-94 is valid. Going between Canada and the U.S., it really doesn't become an issue. And again, even if you were to be living in having an E2 or an E1 and residing in Canada, not going to the U.S. for years at a time, that's perfectly fine as well.
Can I address
Yeah,
the question
sure.
about the financing for an EB5, please?
hmm Of course.
So EB5, you have to, like in an E2, have your money invested and at risk. If you are getting a loan and it's not based on the business itself, there is a way to use financing as part of your EB5 investment. Okay. Again, it's all about with an EB5, the most important element is the source of funds. Well, not the most important, but
hmm
a clear path for each dollar that goes into your investment is essential. Now, it's much easier if you're from Canada because you're filing tax returns and everything is transparent, but it's challenging if you're from countries like Russia or Venezuela where the system is kind of messed up. And so it's all about how we create that clear trace and trail of funds. Like in other words, if Fadi wanted to gift me 900,000, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. That's great, but where did Fadi get that 900,000 from? We have
Right.
to trace it back to its source. That's what's really important to understand, okay? So even if you are financing part of it, we have to show how that financing came about. In other words, let's say you're investing in your cousin's business. Your cousin can't give you that $900,000 as a gift to invest in his business. That's not going to work.
Right. Right. Okay. Can the E1 or E2 be adjusted to a green card?
Not to
Again, yeah. So we touched on this. The E1 or E2 does not, in and of itself, transform it, to be a green card, but it doesn't preclude it from, perhaps having other options like the EB5. Maybe the person, getting an E2 also has a business in Canada, and the businesses are related to each other. And there's something called an EB1C, right?
We
So
know
there
somebody
are,
that did
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So there are certainly, ways to go about it that way. Um,
It's all about creativity, guys, okay? You
mhm.
can't just think in the box. And a lot of lawyers tend to do that, okay? And this is a challenge. This is why we are doing this today. And this is why we work with clients and find them strategic solutions with creativity. If you just follow the FAM or the regs or whatever, you're never going to get your clients the results that they
All
want.
that is, yeah, not everything is black and white.
No,
That's for
it's not.
sure. Yeah. Um, okay, staffing. Does the staffing need to be permanent and full time?
Mm,
No,
not
no, it
for me
doesn't.
too.
Yeah, yeah, it does not. So unlike the EB5 requirements, the E2 requirements, does have flexibility. We've had plenty of clients that have had part-time staff, seasonal staff, temporary, whatever it may be, and that can work. What do you guys say about intercompany transfers? I own a corporation flipping homes in Canada. If I were to open up the same corporation in the US with the same nature, can I qualify for a green card? Um, so first of all, if a person had a business in Canada and expanded it to the US, that person will not be able to qualify for a green card immediately because the U.S. business is still new. It's going to be considered in startup mode.
Mhm.
So the U.S. business cannot be in startup mode in order to qualify for an EB1C. So putting putting the actual details of the company aside, revenue wise, how many employees do they have in Canada, maybe in the U.S. If it was an active business on both sides of the border, right? And I know I just said Canada, but it doesn't have to be Canada in this case. It could be, any other country, because unlike the E2, everyone can qualify for an
Yep.
L1. Everyone can
And an
qualify for an
EB-5.
EB1C. Yeah,
And an EB-5
and an
too.
EB5. Yes, yes, that's correct. So with these types of visas, everybody can qualify for it. There is no nationality requirements, at hand. So, um,
Can I just
but yeah,
add something to that?
sure.
Because the guy said at the end of the question, but it has been established for 3 years. What are my chances? Okay, so if it's not a startup, then we have to analyze the business, the revenues, the staff on both sides. But if it's in Canada, Canada and the US, how does that look? And is it substantial enough to qualify for an EB1C? What might be a better option, and I'm doing this with a client now who's in Belgium, is to get an E2 so that you can initially come here and develop and run business, build it more, and then after a period of time, we can apply for EB1C because you'll still have your Canadian business. But this way, you'll get the US business to be a little more robust and a little more kind of like a going concern. And then your EB1C will be that much stronger.
Mhm. And I'll add to that a little bit further. Keep in mind that the EB1C is an intercompany transferee as a senior manager or an executive of the
Mhm.
company, right? So we're going to want to see, what does your org chart look like for the
Yeah.
foreign company? What does your org chart look like for the U.S. business? Um, if it looks rather flat, then we may look at it as, okay, well, are you a functional manager in this case? So
Mhm.
there are different ways around it, but realistically, if you are a senior manager or executive, meaning you have a manager or managers reporting up to you, and there's people reporting up to those managers, then that's the type of structure that typically is successful when it comes to an EB1C.
Yep.
Okay. I think we touched on most everything. If we have not touched on your questions, we apologize. You can certainly reach out to us further. I hope, Lauren, to do this again with you in the near future, so that we give this opportunity for those that are looking for information about all this interesting stuff that we're talking about. And hopefully, you've all found it useful. Again, Lauren, thank you.
My
And
pleasure.
it was a
Thank you.
pleasure. It was a pleasure doing this with you today.
Thank you.
Keep in mind, if you do want to book any one-on-one time, you can do so. I think our staff has been indicating how to reach out to either myself, to Lauren, and we also have other staff complimenting us as well. All right. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great day. Take
Thank
care,
you.
Lauren. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks a lot, buddy.